Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our sixth and final installment of our In Conversation with a Survivor speaker series for 2020. I am Emily Barsanti-Innes, educator with FSWC. Before we get started this afternoon, I will take a moment to remind viewers to keep their videos off and their mics muted, as this presentation is being recorded and will be circulated later this week. There will be an opportunity for questions at the end of the presentation, but definitely feel free to send those questions along throughout the presentation in the chat box below. Depending on timing, we will do our absolute best to address as many of those questions as possible, but please do not try to unmute yourself to ask questions, as that can be very disruptive. Today, we are joined by Benjamin Dooley, Project and Policy Coordinator for the Raoul Wallenberg Centre for Human Rights, Michael Levitt, CEO of FSWC, and of course, our wonderful guest speaker for the event, Gershon Willinger. To begin, Benjamin will offer some opening remarks. Benjamin is the project, as I mentioned, was the Project and Policy Coordinator for the Raoul Wallenberg Centre for Human Rights, which his duties include policy, programming, and stakeholder management. Benjamin's interest in human rights stems from the early Holocaust education he received as a child, and hearing the experiences of his grandfather as a soldier during the Second World War. He has worked in a variety of international settings, as well as in Canada, with a particular interest in human rights and conflict resolution. He began his career as a freelance reporter overseas during the Arab Spring in Egypt and worked throughout the Middle East, as well as in China and Europe. Benjamin, welcome.
Thank you, Emily, for that very kind introduction. It is indeed a distinct honor and pleasure to be invited to make these brief remarks for this event on behalf of the Raoul Wallenberg Centre for Human Rights, which is pleased to be partnering with the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center for Holocaust Studies on this bi-weekly In Conversation with a Survivor speaker series. I'd also like to commend the team at the Simon Wiesenthal Center for putting together these events. These testimonies provide an important contribution not only to acknowledging historical truth, but to the preservation of memory. Today, we've borne witness to a time when many have bartered in mistruths and aggrandized themselves by trying to convince us that we don't really know what we know or feel the way that we feel. Speaking personally as someone who grew up listening to my relatives who survived the death camps and munitions factories, and my grandfather who fought for Canada during the Second World War, I was taught that in some ways we are defined by what we deem important to remember and how we persevere. Events such as this series serve to give younger people an invaluable link to history and to remind us that the past was real. I am also delighted today that today's speaker is Gershon Willinger. Only a toddler during the war, many of his memories of that period have sadly faded into history. Yet his story is a remarkable one of survival, of liberation, and a testament to the determination of a generation to rebuild after the ashes of the Holocaust and pass on the lessons of history. So like all of you, I'm looking forward to listening to his moving and compelling remarks. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Benjamin. We appreciate you joining us this afternoon for this important programming and the ongoing support and partnership of your center. I will now also briefly introduce our guest of honor tonight, Mr. Gershon Willinger, a man who needs no introduction. Gershon was born in Holland in 1942. His earliest years were spent first in hiding with his wartime family, then later on when he was deported to Bergen Belsen concentration camp. Gershon, along with 48 other children in his transport, managed to survive, but unfortunately his parents were murdered at the extermination camp Sobibor. This information about the fate of his family was something he discovered later on in life. What I love about Gershon's story is how it reminds students and frankly even us as educators about the broader perspective of the Holocaust. That 1945 might mark the end of the war, but it certainly does not mark the end of the suffering that survivors experienced who were left behind after the Nazi reign of terror and violence was ended. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Willinger, give him your attention. And as I said, if you have any questions, please feel free to share them in the chat box and we will address them at the end. Thank you so much. Gershon?
Thank you, Emily. Okay, so it was a beautiful introduction. When I speak usually, I don't have notes in front of me because every time I speak, It comes from the heart, and it is also something that you can do by route. It's something that really needs to come when you introduce yourself to people who you don't know and you give of yourself. It sometimes is very hard to really tell what you really feel, but I shall make an attempt. As the beautiful introduction that was given, I was born in 1942 in the Netherlands, in Holland. My parents came to Holland. My mother in 1929, she came early to Holland. My father in 1945 and then went back to Germany and came back for permanently to Holland in 1937. Now, of course, every story of every survivor is unique insofar that if you were born 10 years before the war, as some of my friends have, they have a history of parents, of grandparents, of aunts and uncles. My life has been spent mostly as I don't call myself necessarily only a Holocaust survivor, but I call myself a child survivor. A child survivor sounds better than saying I'm a victim, because I survived. That already puts a positive stamp on it. My parents, when they were in Holland, they thought that would be a country, a safe haven. Consequently, part of my family in 1935 moved to Palestine, or later the state of Israel. My father and my mother came from Germany to Holland, thinking it was a safe haven, and it makes sense because Holland, since the expulsion of the Jews from Spain and Portugal, when they came north to the Netherlands, they lived in peace and harmony with their neighbors until the start of the Second World War. What also very important to mention, that there was no restriction where they could live. They could also fulfill any professions and study at the universities. They could be small businessmen, they could be anything they wanted to, until the eve of the Second World War, when everything changed. The Netherlands capitulated within 5 days. And after those 5 days, things changed for the Jews. However, the Jews weren't aware of that yet. So before the war in Holland, there were 140,000 Jews. And that is a statistic that's well known. And so my parents had me in 1942. And you can ask yourself, how come that parents have a child in 1942? Because why? Everybody lives in hope. People hope that their life will be better. People don't always want to accept. It took also a while before the Holocaust was taken seriously by the Jewish community. Although there were restrictions, this cannot happen to us. What is happening sounds very untrue, and we just continue to live our lives. But things changed. And my parents, although we talk about resistance fighters during the war, my parents, in a way, I call them resistance fighters because take the example of a parent, your own parents when you were young, to selflessly give you up to the Dutch underground, to the resistance, in the hope that you would live, but not knowing that they would see you again. And that happened to me when I was around 3 months old. And why do I know all this information? Because as you well know, the Jew during the Second World War was a commodity, as in large warehouses, commodity on the shelf, to be used, to be abused, and then to, in the final analysis, to be annihilated. So what happened to me is that that they gave me away with the resistance, and I went to a Righteous of the Nations home in the north of Holland, not far from a Dutch transport camp called Westerbork, where all the trains left every Tuesday morning. As clockwork, they were left for the east. And I was placed with these people, the heroes, the righteous among the nations, Because ask yourself, if your children and your family would be at risk, would you place a child in the care of someone, and would that person accept you in their home, knowing that if their name was given away, they could be heavily punished, go to prison, or even executed? But they did this. The whole town, which was called Koevoorden, was working for the resistance. But in a basket of good apples, there's always a bad apple. My name was given away. My wartime father went to jail, and I went. Can I see the next picture, please? Yeah, and I was sent to Camp Westerbork. Camp Westerbork is a transit camp. So, as you well know the stories very well, people were asked told to take their suitcases, their few belongings, and they were put on the cattle cars, and the rest of the story you know. However, when a child was by themselves, and again, when people were in Westerbork, every walk of life from the Jewish community was in Westerbork. And if you were a nurse, you worked as a nurse. If you were a teacher, you worked as a teacher. It didn't matter who you were. You tried to find your niche and help and do something because you lived in hope. It didn't dawn on everybody what was going to happen. But you can also imagine the angst of people to know that every Tuesday this train left. And later, as the war progressed, people knew very well what was going on. And so most families went with children and babies. Of course, whole families en bloc went on the trains. Many succumbed en route because many people had to stand as well. Why a little baby like myself stays alive? Well, the Nazi regime took great pride in their ability to document things. And it was not known whether I was a full Jewish child or a child. The story was told to them that I was a child, maybe of a German soldier, of a non-Jew. That didn't mean necessarily that you could stay alive and you wouldn't be sent to the East, but it bought time. So consequently, from the beginning of 1943 until the 13th of September, 1944, I was in Westerbork. How come that I know all those dates? And how can I tell you this story? Again, my parents came from Germany, and it helped me, but it's very ironic that everything was documented by the Nazi regime of Jews who came from Germany and of Holland. So over the years, until recently and still today, I could really learn what happened to me because there was a long paper trail that helped me put the story together with the help of Yad Vashem, with the help of the tracing center in Bad Arolsen in Germany, with the help from Bergen Belsen, with the help from Westerbork, and I visited all these places. And the last I did was last year to Theresienstadt, which I don't remember, but I have a close friend who does remember and remembered us coming. And Joseph Zippen, who is a friend of mine, he knows very much more about that than I did. I jump a little bit because that is my life, very chaotic from the beginning. So when I was in Westerbork, until the 13th of September 1944, with 49 other children, and it was documented, books have been written about that, we were placed on a transport together to Bergen Belsen. We arrived in Bergen Belsen probably the next day or the day after, and we remained in Bergen Belsen until 2 months later, because we were privileged 50 children. We were between the ages of 18 months and 6 years old. There were 4 young ladies accompanying us. The last one, the oldest, over 100 years old, passed away a couple of years in Australia. But I never had contact with these children, although I met a few during my early life and didn't know that we had the same story and were placed on transport together. Most of those 50 children, of those 49 children, came much later than myself. But I was placed with them, and we were together 50, and we went to Bergen Belsen. Can I have the next picture, please? Now, what you see here, to make your life a little bit more complicated, is a list of children, of those 50 children. You see, I'm written on that list, written down. It's not typed in. It's Gert I. Willinger, and when I was born. Now, I was born Gert Israel Willinger. Israel, the little boys in Holland, by the Nazi regime, were called Israel, the girls Sarah. So I was Gert Israel Willinger, but I was known as Fritz, and I tell you that story now that we go on. Can I have the next picture, please? Now, what you see here is an original document, a copy of original document, and number 4 says Gruppe of unbekannte Kinder, which means group of unknown children, 50 children. And we went with, this was the very last transport from the 13th of September, 1944 to Bergen Belsen. Can I have the next one, please? Now, here is an overview, a little bit of Bergen Belsen. Bergen Belsen was full of typhus and contagion. People died by the thousands, especially people also who came on the death march, and some people who came directly to Bergen Belsen. No food, no hygiene, no sanitation. And we were privileged children because we were to be bartered with. We were 50 children, and those 50 children were placed in quarantine, a very mild one, I presume, in the camp. And we stayed there, and we were there at the same time, really, as you're well known, Anna Frank was there, because she succumbed 2 weeks before the end of the war, and Margot also succumbed from typhus. And I call that murder, because those children weren't supposed to die, and all those other thousands of children who died weren't supposed to die. I actually should call that murder as well. And so we were really the miracle children. We were also known as the unbekannte Kinder. We were known as the unknown children because we couldn't advocate for ourselves. We were there completely on our own. And with those 4 ladies. So we had to be cared for. As a child who was born during that time and who went through so many camps, I had a hard time talking about it for many years. Also, do I really belong? Who am I? What am I? And children also conjure up stories in their mind. Maybe my parents are still alive. Who are they? Where are they? And where do they come from? So slowly throughout my life, that history came together, and I still do research. That's why I tell my students always, learning history, what happened in the past and the present, which becomes history tomorrow, is very important, because that's what we rely on. That's our legacy. So after we were in Bergen Belsen for a while, to be bartered with, we left, and we went to the next camp. Can we have the next camp, please? And that's Theresienstadt in the former Czechoslovakia. You see, Arbeit macht frei, labor liberates, and it was a garrison town. It was actually this campus interwoven with a little town. The people were taken out of the town, and it was made available for the Jews. It was also a showpiece for the Nazi regime. Although from there, many people were also transported to Auschwitz and to their death. And it's beautiful things came out of about the Theresienstadt. You can ask what kind of beautiful things. Beautiful drawings by children, and children tell the truth. When I was last in Theresienstadt, most of the drawings were laminated, and they talked volumes of what was in the children's heart, the poems as well, and the stories that they wrote. So that grip, that was innocence, comes from children, but they always had hope. So the music that came out of Theresienstadt, the performances, the theater. And we stayed in that camp until the end of the war. Now, I'm a little bit maybe at a miss, but I think it was the 8th or 9th May. There was the liberation of Theresienstadt. And what happens after that? Well, we children all survived Theresienstadt, but people that are broken, that have to be sorted out, that don't know if their families are still alive, what to do with them, and where to go to. So because we were small children, we went with different modes of transportation to various places. I did not go with a bus or with a train. We went on and then smatterings of my memories start to come to the foreground. I remember being placed on a bus, or not a bus, on a truck, a Red Cross truck, and we were taken to Holland. I remember picking up small clusters of children everywhere on the way to Holland as well. By the way, as you know, Theresienstadt was liberated by the Russian army. So today, in today's politics, we talk about Russia, but then people who have different experiences talk differently again. So I don't want to go into that, but they really liberated us. Now, about 3 days, which seemed forever, we arrived back in the Netherlands, in Holland. We came in Eindhoven, the home of Philips Industries. We came back into Holland. And then what began in Holland, and that's what was referred to at that time as the Little Holocaust. And the Little Holocaust meant, what do we do with all those small children who can't talk for themselves? Where are their parents still alive? Do they have family members who can take them? And that's what they call the Little Holocaust. Before those children were placed and they found places for them, they were sent from pillar to post. Luckily, my wartime parents, the righteous among the nations, were looking for me. And somehow, because, can I have the next picture, please? Can I have the next one? Yes. So I'm just jumping back a moment. What you see in front of you is called Het Parool. It's a list of freed Dutch prisoners who came back to Holland. These were stuck on public buildings because people were looking for their loved ones. Are they still alive? Aren't they alive? You have to take my word for it that in the middle column, I am known as Fritzje Israel. Fritzje is an endearment for Fritz. Why was my name Fritz? And I forgot to tell you that because so much to say. What happened is that when I was living at the time, I was placed with these underground parents, the righteous among the nations. There was a pastor who was asking from the pulpit his congregants, please hide Jews. So my wartime parents found it very appropriate to call me Fritz. And Fritz was my calling name until I left Holland, until I was 18 years old, never officially. So I'm on that, and so they looked for me and they found me. Can I have the next one, please? And so what happened is, this is a photo, one official photo, not long after I came back from the camps, and I was placed with an official stamp on it. So when I came back, the righteous among the nations people, Schonegele was their name, took me back in, and I was later told in a letter from the youngest brother who was 16 during the war, who lived with the family, said to me that I came back full of scars and I was screaming for a couple of months straight, and they couldn't handle me very well. However, that calmed down a little bit. And then when I started to get used to the home, the Department of Social Services for Jewish War Orphans took me away from there and placed me somewhere else. Can I have the next picture, please? Okay, before I left, what you see is a picture on the left with wooden shoes, because we wear wooden shoes, klompen in Dutch. They're clogs. very warm with straw on it. I'm the little boy with the hand on the forehead that you see there. My wartime brother stands next to me. He's a head taller, but the same age. And the house in the background is where I lived, above the front door. Now, behind there is also my sister. I haven't mentioned her yet. I didn't know at the time that she was my sister, and she was hidden at a different place in the same province. But I didn't know at the time that she was my sister. On the picture on the right, the tall boy, the blonde boy, was my Jan, my wartime brother, and I shared a bed with him because we didn't have the luxury in those days of having a bed to yourself. And there's also the older sister on the far left in the grayish dress. So once I got used to them, as I saw, the Department of Social Services took me away from there. Can I have the next picture, please? And here I felt very much at home. This is the orphanage where I was from 1946 to 1947, with and I am sitting on the lap of this little girl on the right, not kneeling down, and I had very much. I didn't enjoy, but I felt very much at home because I was already about 5 years old, and I felt good. And that is really makes sense, because if almost from birth you have been schlepped around from place to place and you have no really permanent home, and you're used to children, whether it's not in a nice environment, that's what you get used to. So I was tuned into children, and I was used to not being on my own. So I felt that this was going to be my next home. But again, a new home had to be found for me through the Department of War Orphans. And I went from there, I went to a convalescent center, which children who were in camps or children who were hidden went to. That was at the sea in Holland. It was a nice home. Every day we went to the beach to breathe in the sea air and to get good food. I remember from that place that I was at a table with younger children like myself, and we got our food given to us. At the other table were children who hadn't seen their parents, who didn't even know that they were alive. And they were just trying to grab the food from each other because they had to do, the survival of the fittest. So really my age at that time helped very much that I didn't have to do that myself. But in a young child's mind, you think this is going to be my home, but it wasn't to be. They found an aunt from the maternal side, from my mother's side, who was going to look after me. She was actually a spinster, very well educated. And I remember I started going to school there. I was very independent. I was very small for my age, though. But one day she said, "Would you like to visit the people who came to visit her and me?" They were a nice couple, and they went away. And the next week, the little suitcase was packed, and I didn't see my aunt again. So I talked to you briefly about my moves, but these moves took place between 1945 and 1950. So finally, can I have the next picture, please? Finally, a home was found for me with a childless Jewish couple who also were broken people, who actually, one worked in the resistance because her looks weren't overly Jewish and she could do that. And my new foster father went through Westerbork and jail and escaped and so forth. So they were people who wanted to get on with life and that's what they did. But still, the hurt and the pain, what was in those days not spoken about, it was not done because everybody had in mind, we want to make families, we want to start living, we want to have a home for ourselves. So in that milieu, I was placed. And here you see, again, 3 pictures of myself when I was younger. I think I was around 6 years old, but I was very small for my age. When I went to Holland, to Haarlem, to the Department for War Documentation. I got a whole pile of papers on myself, as I told you, the paper trail, and where was written that this child at the end of the war was developmentally delayed because my tonsils were very large. And I remember when I came to my new home with my new foster parents, I was not toilet trained at the age of 8. I also could not walk the stairs. I remember a family member taught me to walk the stairs at that time, and the assessments of children weren't that developed. So we can have the next picture, please. And I stay at this picture for a little while. I was very privileged because my speech wasn't very good, and I needed to be, and it was very courageous of those people to take me on. I was taken into psychoanalysis and psychiatry, which was still in its very early stages. They were advanced people, and from the age of 8 to 13, I had psychiatric help, and mainly because you go from place to place. It made me a lot stronger. I don't know how strong it made my foster parents because they had a lot to deal with. I also slowly started finding out who I was. They told me I was Jewish. Now, for an 8, 9, 10-year-old Jew, you are Jewish sounds very abstract because the only thing I remember was with my wartime parents going to church with them, and I liked church because church, the pathos of the large churches and the hymns, which I know a few of them still today. But when they told me I was Jewish, for some obvious reasons, I took to that very quickly. And why did I take to that? Everything is taken away from you as a small child. You go from place to place. Doesn't mean you feel sorry for yourself. You don't know any better. But when they say you're Jewish, you're smart enough to know that that is something people cannot take away from you. So that was yours. So consequently, I identified quite fast as a Jew. Then slowly I found out that I had parents, and I'd like to introduce you to them. You see them here. You see Guido Willinger on the left, and Guido was born on the 29th of July, 1908. On the right, you see my mother, Edith Helene Willinger Rothschild. She was born on the 28th of July, 1909. There were a year difference. They were 33 and 34 years old, and they were taken at the end of June to Westerbork, the transit camp, and that was still during the time that I was there as well. But obviously I was a toddler, I wouldn't know. And they were placed immediately on a train which took them to Sobibor, Poland, where they were murdered on the 2nd of July, 1943, upon arrival. I slowly, as a child, it didn't sink in that much, but slowly it started to sink in. So already as a teenager, I started to do research on myself. Who were my parents? And started to conjure up all kinds of stories. My parents must be still alive. Maybe you took them to Siberia, to Russia, and so forth. So all the stories. And yes, the treatment that I received helped greatly with that, because as a small child, and I'm not unique in that, many small children who were born from 1940 on and who lost their parents and family need validation for their existence, who they are as people. And I needed that validation as well. And so consequently, for years and years, I started to find out who I was and where I really came from. Now, I was stateless in Holland because my parents never naturalized. I come from generations upon generations from Germany. My parents both were born in Dortmund in Germany. And actually, I'm quite proud of my heritage, because the Jewish community in Germany, I'm not talking about the Nazi regime, was a thriving community who had also integrated within society, and I don't have to tell you about it. And they were quite liberal in their approach to their Judaism, although they were proud of their Judaism, but they also were part of the country and the culture they lived in. So that's why I tell today to Jews, do not be paranoid who you are and where you live. However, don't take things for granted. And as I still do that today, a tiny bit from time to time, I look over my shoulders what's happening. Now, I stayed in Holland. I went to high school. Then I was taken away from the high school because of problems, and I went into special education in high school. Of course, I found out later in life that I was definitely not developmentally late because I got 2 degrees from universities. So, but I did that also for the profession, but I did it also because I wanted to prove that the early diagnosis of who I was and what I really could do or not do was not true. Anyway, I stayed until I was 18 in Holland, but I lived always on the periphery because I was never Dutch. But finally, in 1959, my foster parents adopted me, so consequently, I could receive a nationality, and I received a Dutch nationality. Now, I have to tell you also, maybe I jump a little bit. Everybody has this wonderful story, this wonderful picture of Holland with the nice rooftops, the canals, the narrow roads, the streets, Amsterdam, beautiful, beautiful little country. About 85% of Dutch people were, whether they wanted to or not want to, collaborators with the Nazi regime. And that's not so known. 85%, I could also say, there were collaborators with the Nazi regime and many, many good people who did nothing. And that is really a matter of the conscience. If your life is in danger, would you stick your neck out and help somebody else? And I'm not putting that to you as, hey, I want an answer from you, but we have to ponder that. I even ponder that for myself. I would be as courageous as my foster parents were, the righteous among the nations who I had honored after many, many years, and who really stuck their neck out, and also were not sure if they were caught, what would happen to them. So anyway, I received the Dutch nationality, and as I, from 14 years of age, wanted to leave Holland, because I was very well aware that I had a pink passport, which meant for stateless people who were guests in the country where they were born in, because I was born in Holland from German parents. But anyway, I wasn't seen as Dutch. But finally, with the adoption, I received a Dutch passport. I utilized that passport a year later to immigrate to Israel. On my 18th birthday, I went to Israel with the train from Amsterdam to Paris, then to Marseille, and on the boat to Israel. I went to the kibbutz. I studied a language which I already knew from Holland, and I then joined the army. And that is the first time that I felt really that I belonged, because in Holland, I just became Dutch shortly before I left. Can I have the next picture, please? Okay, so many, many things happened, but I'll stay with this. I went to Israel. Can I go back to this picture, but can we have the next picture, please? Okay, what happened also while I was with my foster parents, I found out I had a sister, Rita. Rita Hannah, she was hidden. She knew that she had a little brother because she was hidden, and came to a sister of our birth father who survived, Guido Willinger. The sister survived. She took Rita in, and I met Rita for the first time. I was 8 and she was 10. Can I have the next picture, please? Here on the right, you see Rita with myself again. It was the last picture taken of us. Because of my childhood problems, she was taken as a foster child with our aunt and our uncle to the United States, to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where she was also adopted, and she became Janowitz. So our aunt and uncle became her parents. I stayed in Holland with my foster parents, and with whom I, as I told you the story, grew up. I can't talk about suffering, but having many mental health issues, my sister was greatly disturbed and angry when she was young, because she knew very well that she had a little brother and they were separated from each other. So I remained in the foster home. She went to America. And then, and on the right, you see a picture of my father with my sister. She was still young enough to have a picture taken with him. Can I have the next picture, please? So when I went to Israel, let me go back again to that story. My sister, I'm now finally in good contact with. We were as strangers. She came when I was 19 years old and stationed in the Golan, near the Golan Heights. It wasn't a 6-day war yet. She came to visit Israel looking for me. We found each other. It didn't work out. She stayed in Israel and then went back to America. And then finally, when we were 35, we met again. Things went a bit better. We both were married, and slowly, now finally, when she's 80 today and I'm 78, we have finally become friends. And we, for the first time, actually this past week, we told each other that we loved each other. That was not a thing that we both were able to do all those years, but finally we did that. What you see in front of you here is a picture of myself with a red beret. I volunteered for the paratroopers. I was a paratrooper, which could be comparable in Canada to the Marines. Then there are 2 more pictures where I'm in. I had to laying ambush in the Jordan Valley and on the Syrian border. And I was also very proud that I was there in 10 years. I was in reserves, that I was there with the capture of the old city of Jerusalem. As those who know Motagur, he was my commander in charge at that day. So I knew it. I'm not a fighter, but I knew what I was fighting for and what I needed to do. And then when the war of attrition was on, I finally, before the war of attrition, I had to go into the reserves. But before that, let me tell you, I went to Hebrew University and finished a degree in social work. And I went for a vacation to Europe. I met my wife. She came back to Israel, very married. And before we got married, and she just had arrived, I had to go for 6 weeks to the Suez Canal, to El Arish, where it was very terrible and dirty at the Suez Canal in the desert. And then finally, after that, we got married, and we didn't know very much about PTSD in those days, but we still managed to get married. My wife only asked how come that he sits up for about half a year in the middle of the night straight in bed. And I didn't know myself why that was happening, but it was happening. So that's just a little anecdote. Not to forget again that you are made who you are also from your background. So can I have the next picture, please? Now, this is a famous picture of my family. We have been married over 50 years. And that's when I say I know really who my family are. For very sure that I know who my family are, because if you become the hearsay boy and you hear and you read where you come from and who you are, sometimes it's nice to create something yourself here. And that's what happens. Next picture, please. Here's a picture of my family. I have got 7 grandchildren between the ages of 11 and 16. I have got 3 children with spouses. So that's really, this picture exemplifies the war Hitler did not win. So may I ask you to go back to those 2 stones that you showed before? Yeah, thank you. Now, when I was already in Canada, the Holocaust Center of Toronto received a call from a historian / teacher interested in Holocaust, who called and thought and asked if they could find a Gershon Willinger. And they said yes, and they asked me if this man could get in contact with me, and he did. This was a man who lived in the town where my father worked as a chef in a Jewish hotel. The town is Bad Wildungen in Germany, not far from Kassel and not too far from Hamburg. And he said, we have a Stolpersteine for you, which is a stumble stone. And this is in the ground, and I didn't know very much about Stolpersteine. So what we did, we went to Germany, and I saw it says here lived Guido Willinger, born in 1908, deported or deportiert in German in 1943, Sobibor, and ermordet. So they didn't pull any punches. Ermordet means murdered. So when his stone was up for a while, I said, and they took the cost on themselves, the local authorities, and it was all over Germany. I said, I would like a stone to be erected also, or put down for my mother, a Stolpersteine. Although she didn't live in the town, they were murdered on the same day, and I would like a Stolpersteine put down for my mother. So they put a Stolpersteine down for my mother, and a little bit more elaborate, because it says on the top, born in Dortmund, Edelhilaire Willinger, geboren Rothschild, the year 1909, via Umzug Holland, interneerd in Westerbork, deported in 1943 to Sobibor, and the correct date, because more research had been done already, murdered on the 2nd of the 7th, 1943. I wasn't even a year old yet. But it's as if I have got two pictures. The two pictures you saw before of my parents, those are two pictures that hang on my wall. These are people who I imagine what they could be. My mother was almost 34 and my father was almost 35 when they were murdered. So I think, so when you speak to audiences, and that's why I speak more from the heart and rather from a piece of paper, and maybe there's a little bit of a jumble sometimes and you have a hard time to keep up with me. I do this because I want to give you the feeling of what it is like to be born and to be raised in chaos. So consequently, this is me today. I am child survivors are becoming very important because we are becoming scarce as a people, and every survivor is important. I finally, after 50, started speaking and thought for myself that it is, yes, I do belong. I do belong, although I don't have much of a memory. You went through camps that you don't remember, and the most prized possession you have, your parents, you never knew, and you owe them a lot because you are alive and you have lived all those years of your life. Can I see the very last picture, Mon, please? There's one. Yes, this last picture I'd like you to see. This is of a book that was published by Holland in the conjunction with the Dutch government. It's a book of all the deported list of murdered Jews from Holland, Dutch Jews, and it's really absurd even to talk about it. This is a dictionary with 103,000 names in alphabetical order. What you see is the purple on the bottom. There are my father's, my mother's, uncles, and my grandparents' name, and where they were born, when they were deported, and where they were murdered. So it's the 2nd of July. This is a book that was published in Holland in the early 90s. It was all bought up, but when I was in Holland, I had to look in Amsterdam through all kind of antique shops and call, and finally there was still a copy available for me. To me, that is almost as my Tanakh, my Bible, because it's, if you can't see your parents in the flesh, at least you see the written word, and the written word becomes very important to you. It's the next best thing. That's why I always tell children and students, learn from history. And what the message I leave with my students is, Don't be a silent bystander. Don't be a good person who does nothing. Be interested, stand up for other people. And be interested in the Yazidis. Be interested in the Rohingyas. Be interested in the people in China who are, I forgot the name, you probably will know the name, the people in China who are in reprogramming institutions and do slave labor and so forth. And so the apple doesn't fall that far from the tree. You're the future leaders of this country. I tell you a story. It's unique for me, but there are many other stories. Listen to that and stand up. And already I tell my students, don't be a bully in class. When there's a person who is very, very much in the background and thinks he doesn't belong, envelop him and make him belong to your group. So I can tell a lot more things. Is my time almost up, or do I have still time to speak?
So if we want to get to a couple questions, I would say to wrap up the testimony part. But if you still want to continue, it's up to you.
I will wrap up the testimony. I'm very surprised that I'm able to kind of wrap it up within the context of something and not ramble on. And I tell you, the reason that I'm sometimes jump from place to place is that I speak from a place inside of here, inside myself, and I don't read it up from a piece of paper. It's not a rationalization for not preparing myself. No, I come well prepared. However, that's what I needed to do. Please, I'm still alive. Other survivors are alive. Their story needs to be heard. It needs to be in the annals of history. And as need all the stories that today happen in the world. I, as a child survivor, very much when I look in the face on pictures and in the news of a child from Asia, from Africa, who are being badly treated, who have a trauma, and they all have PTSD. The resilience is that those children will learn throughout life to live with it. But try and put yourself and look at this child not as okay another person. Look at this child as flesh and blood and think about it. Because we are so privileged to live in a country where we at least are free to speak our mind, although racism in any way still exists currently here too. And I don't have to tell you, but I tell my students, fight against it, fight against it. I do thank you very much for listening. And if there are any questions, here I am.
So we do have a couple questions that have come through. During your testimony, you mentioned that your degree was in social work.
Yes.
Right. So a viewer was wondering how you feel those the experience you had during the Holocaust and during your period of transition afterwards, how that strengthened your work with young people afterwards and in your work practice.
Well, in my work practice, I worked mostly in Israel with street corner groups, the very downtrodden who lived in certain areas of the country, also in the neighborhoods in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and Haifa. And I worked with them, I program planned for them. And in Canada, I worked with mentally, physically, sexually abused young people, and to do functional program planning for them to put them back as citizens if I could. Why I chose this? Well, you have to separate your professional work from your personal life. However, for me, I'm not altruistic. However, it was for me payback to society, because with all the terrible things that happened, I needed still, as a child, some guidance. Whether I took advantage of it at certain times or not, that is something else. But it was given to me, and having had treatment as a young child, I wanted to give back, and I never was sorry for the profession I chose, because some people are there to serve other people, some people are there to do other things, and that's why I chose. If that's enough of an answer.
That's an incredible answer. Yes, absolutely. Another question we had was about Holocaust education in Dutch schools, if that's mandatory or if you know much about what they teach right now in reference to, like you said, a lot of, unfortunately, bystanders and of course collaborators in Holland, wondering how that translates into education today.
Well, I went to Holland and I spoke for schools when I was visiting there a number of years ago. It wasn't mandatory, and it's still not mandatory, although it is mentioned now. The Dutch government, you must know, not very long ago, finally apologized what they did to the Jews. The Queen went to England, the princess went to Canada, and goodbye to the Jews. And the Jews after the war were not seen with a sympathetic eye. So the Dutch have much to account for. Finally, that I must say, and because you asked about Holland, the person who asked the question, I spoke in Germany, and quite much in Germany, very, very organized, because I speak German. So I spoke for schools, yes, and the kids said, when were you the last time in Germany? And I said, well, that was in 1944. And have you been ever back? And I said, I don't remember when I was there, but I was there and I never came back. I was also very nervous to come back to Germany. But I said, I would say that the Dutch children, it's universal. Learn, you are young people. Your duty is to take care that those things don't happen. I don't hold you personally responsible. How can we hold them responsible? If I held them responsible, I shouldn't be visiting any country in Europe. Any country. And I'm visiting the countries in Europe. And yes, I have made friends in Germany. And the problem is also, and I think it's interesting to hear that because I go to Germany, and some people here in this country told me, how can you go to Germany, my Jewish friends? And I said, why not? That's the culture I originally come from. Do I have to be ashamed of the culture I come from? Or can I go back to the culture I come from? And that's what I did. I went back, and yes, I felt very much at home. No, I don't need a German nationality, which I can get. I really am not waiting for that. And no, I don't need to live in Germany. But at the moment, in 2020, it's a country like any other countries. In some ways not so good, but in some ways much better than many other countries in Europe I know.
Absolutely, definitely. I know a lot of their work on memorial and cultural practices definitely has come a long way, absolutely. So thank you, Gershon, so much. As always, I always learn something new in your testimony, and I'm so thankful that you got to join us here tonight. I'm going to quickly turn the conversation over to Michael, our president and CEO, for a few closing remarks.
Okay, good.
Thank you very much. And I promise to get everybody out of here by 5 o'clock. We're still under the wire. Gershon, thank you. I had the opportunity to speak to Gershon yesterday, and your words, your testimony, so important. And thank you for joining us here for this session this afternoon. I want to just reflect on one of the lessons that you leave for the students you speak to, and that's to learn from history and not to be a silent bystander, to stand up. And when you talked about it in the context of the human rights challenges we're seeing around the world today, the Uyghurs in China, the Rohingya, the Yazidis, so important, because it's being able to reflect on the lessons of the past to make sure we're addressing and that we're seeking to do all we can to not go down that same road again. But unfortunately, we know it's happening all too commonly. So having you provide that testimony, not just to us here today, because I'm looking at the list of people that are on the call, and it's a lot of the people that join us each time for these sessions. But the fact that you're able to go into schools and speak to students and motivate and inspire them with these lessons, kol hakavod to you and all the survivors that take on that sacred, quite honestly, sacred task, because it's more important now than ever. We see that in so many of the challenges we're facing. So Gershon, thank you again for being here and for rounding up this term of our survivor stories. We'll have more coming up in the year ahead, but I also want to thank Emily, who has been working so hard at putting these sessions together over the last number of months. Emily, thank you for all that you've done to make these such a success, and also to all of our education team for their efforts in supporting Emily in that task as well. And finally, to all of you that are on the session with us today. And as I said, there's some new faces, but there's also a lot of people that join us here every 2 weeks. Please follow us, keep your eyes open for upcoming events. We're organizing a really large and wonderful, it's going to be a very poignant event for International Holocaust Remembrance Day on January 27th. We're partnering with a number of Holocaust centers, a number of synagogues, the Kashitsky Center at York University. I'm not going to name all of them because I'm going to forget a number of the people that are organizations that are participating, but we hope you'll join us for that as well. And to all of you, we've got a couple of nights of Hanukkah to go, but Chag Sameach to you all, and wishing you a safe and healthy year ahead. Thank you very much. Back to you, Emily.
Thank you. Chag Sameach. Chag
Thanks.
Sameach.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. So I want to thank everyone once again for coming out this afternoon and joining us for Gershon's testimony. A special thank you to the Raoul Wallenberg Centre for their contribution to this partnership over the past couple months and helping make this program so successful. Of course, I want to thank Gershon, who I've had the pleasure of working with over these past 2.5 years. And today, of course, was no exception. It was incredible. And finally, I want to thank each and every one of the participants on this call, whether this is your first time joining us or you've been with us since the beginning. We're so happy you made time to listen and learn from our incredible survivors. While this may be the end of the Survivor Speaker Series for this season, we will be continuing in 2021 with the first session on Wednesday, January 20th. So stay tuned for more information on that. And I want to thank everyone for their commitment to preserving the memories of those who suffered and those who died. During this period of Hanukkah, it is a good reminder for us all that despite the challenges that we face, the light of hope will burn brightly as long as though there are those who nurture and care for it. And I truly believe that is everyone on this call. Have a wonderful evening and a restful holiday season ahead. Good night.